everyone. So I will start our webinar. I am Natasha, and I am today's host for the Afro-Australians and Mental Health webinar, talking about inclusivity and mental health solutions in our various industries. Before we go on to our webinar, I would like to acknowledge the country. Our webinar from where I am situated is held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners of this land. I would also like to pay my respects to their leaders, past, present, and emerging, and Aboriginals of other communities who may be here with us today. I would also just like to say hi to all our attendees and thank you for joining us today. We are live on Facebook and we will be on YouTube as well. So this is very exciting. This is our first webinar on Afro-Australians at the Mental Health Foundation. And we hope to do this every year bigger and better. And thank you all to the hosts for coming and joining us today to speak on this topic. I think this is very dear to our hearts. And there's been a lot of stigma on mental health and mental illnesses in our various communities as Afro-Australians. And I'll just call out everyone and then, so we have Lori Hulley. Can just wait for us.
Hi, I'm Laura.
We have Veronica.
Hi, I'm Veronica. Lovely to meet you all.
We have Guido.
Hey, good day. Guido Melo here. Nice to see everyone.
We have Machehi.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Machehi.
And then we have Natasha. Well, we have Abungile.
Hi, all. It's all good. Natasha's fine as well. Hi, everyone.
And then we have Taita.
Hi, everyone. Happy Africa Day.
So this webinar will be looking into inclusivity in the mental health solutions and all our industries, investigating these disparities between public, private, and non-profit sectors. As they broaden their multicultural reach, they must explore and initiate their corporate structures. I would like Guido Melo to start with his experience. Guido Melo has a huge, extensive background and is doing very well in his community. Guido Melo is an Afro-Brazilian latex multilingual author and poet based in Nam, currently undertaking a Bachelor of Arts in Writing and Digital Media at the Victoria University. His words can be found in Peril Magazine, Ascension Magazine, SBS Voices, SBS Portuguese, Codite Vos Limpia, ABC, Alpama, Preta Generalissimo, and Guido Negro News. Guido is also a member of Sweatshop Literacy Movement, a columnist for Negre, and a contributor to anthologies growing up in African Australian and racism, stories on fear and hate, and biography. Nice to meet you, Guido.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction.
Not a problem. I hope I pronounced all my
now, your Portuguese was impeccable.
Thank you.
You can just move to Brazil.
Thank you.
You would fit right in.
Yes, Guido. So we'd love to hear from you.
Listen, before the meeting, I had a conversation with Phila Sunday, and I think the best way, as someone that's not a professional in mental health, is to tell my story of mental health. And I think that's something that I control and I can be open about it. And from that, anyone watching can draw their own conclusions. So I cannot bring any diagnostics or advices, but I can tell what it's been like for me. So, growing up, it's really living in a society in Brazil, because we are Afro-Brazilians, Afro-descendants. It's expected. There's many scientific studies that points that there is an intergenerational trauma caused or linked directly to the transatlantic slavery traffic that kidnapped Africans from Africa to the Americas for slavery from the 1500s. And I'm descendant of those enslaved peoples. And those traumas, those generational traumas, made our parents and grandparents act in extreme distress, and they create technologies of survival that were oftentimes extremely violent. And when I say violent, they're not necessarily physical specifically, but mentally as well. And my mom and my father and my mother have that on them, and then they pass that to me. So those traumas that I never had names for these. I just had sort of patterns and behaviors that they were irregular. They were they didn't have any reason to be. It was just really things I learned at home or learned to survive in Brazil, and then after moving to Australia as well. So about 10 years ago, my first son was born in Australia, and I remember feeling very triggered by the idea that I would be the stay-home dad. My partner, the mother of the kids, was the person that did most of the work. And I remember one of the conversations we had was like, listen, these sort of behaviors are not normal. You really need to see some counseling. And that's was really out of really fear of like the thoughts I was having were really scary for me. So I went to see a counselor, and then I realized that my behaviors were rooted not just in African post-traumatic stress disorder caused by historical slavery, but also by Eurocentric patriarchy. And my biggest problem was that I couldn't accept as a male that I would be the person that would be doing the nourishing. And I remember that the therapist asked me an honest question. She said, do you realize you have a privilege that you'll be spending as much, if not more time with your newborn than his mother? And that's a gift that life is giving to you. And upon realizing that, I've really shifted my understanding. We now understand, now I'm my third therapist, and we now understand that it's very likely that I also suffering from something that very few people know even existed for men, which is postnatal depression, but male postnatal depression that was triggered by this sort of sequence of events. And that led me on this journey of, embrace mental health. About 3 years ago, an African Brazilian woman named Kiki, a psychologist, Kiki Rodriguez, she created a group called the Afro-Brazilian Resistance, which is a group that's exclusive in Australia for Afro-Brazilians only, excluding white Brazilians, which is the majority of the migrants to this land. And in there, I had the opportunity to have discussions with other African men about mental health, and even African women. And I'm proud to say that, I helped, dozens of people to seek mental health just by sharing with them my experience. It's really, you cannot disassociate economical class, race, and gender, historical context to what leads to men and women, African Brazilians, and that's the people I can talk the most, but I'm sure that will reach people of color and Africans in the global context in some way or another. How that there's this idea that we don't need to be treated because we don't need any external support, because we have to be strong, because our parents teach us to be strong, especially as on the Americas in the diaspora there, because of the consequence of slavery and the consequence of, impoverishment. So this journey of opening up myself through a therapist, now I go to a therapist in Melbourne, in Victoria, that's run by an African woman. It's called Paula Psychology. And in there, I have the ability to tell my story, to converse with it, and that I bring that to outside and I talk with other people. And I think that's really the key. I think we Black men have to understand that racism and patriarchy is as dangerous to us and is as violent and as visceral problematic to us as it is obviously to women who will suffer this, and to ourselves, to other fellow males. And I think opening up to these conversations, I hope that myself as a person that's just one of everyone, as I said, not a profession, but one of the public, that I can tell my story and encourage all the men, all the African men in that way, to have the opportunity to enjoy the joys I'm having of opening up myself and open up, my being, and little by little destroy the racism, the low self-esteem, and the patriarchy that were embedded in me because of the structures of the Western civilization. I think that's what I have to say.
I think that's so amazing, Guido, that you actually took the first step in, wanting to seek help and, knowing that help was there for you. I think in our community, especially for Black men, they don't usually want to take the first step to seek help or acknowledge the fact that they need help. Just not just better themselves, but also better the environment as the head of their households. And just also using social media to spread the word, Facebook groups, that it's really good that you're able to encourage other Afro-Brazilians and other Afro-Australians to do that. And I'll also just introduce Natasha. She will be our second speaker. Thank you so much, Guido, for that. Natasha will be our second speaker. Natasha is a community development worker and advocate. She has been part of many community projects over the years, from being part of the group that pioneered AfroCare, a mental health organization that provides and tailor-made services to African communities, committed to educating the community and assisting them on appropriate services. She's also she was also firstly part of ASO, which is Afro-Australian Student Organization, and also helped start the African Australian Women in Action. She's been part of many other community groups and projects over the years, working in collaboration with local government. She's a fervent and passionate about progress of people of African descent in Australia and the world at large. Hi, Natasha.
Hi guys, hi everyone. Thank you so much for offering me the privilege to come speak today, Pillar, and your team at Mental Health Foundation Australia. Today I'll quickly be touching on inclusive mental health solutions in the public sector. And I guess a lot of my views and a lot of my what I've observed comes from just being in Australia a while. So a lot of it is anecdotal, I guess, like Guido. I think a lot of what we're speaking about is a little less about data and numbers and, just the rigid, or the rigid way of looking at things. We also have to look at things anecdotally as well. So yeah, I guess my story begins also when I first came to Australia. One of the first things that I picked up on is just how invisible I felt within the wider mainstream white society. And then also then that kind of pointed out to me that, okay, if I'm feeling invisible, then a lot of people in my community will be feeling invisible as well. I noticed things like, we're not visible, obviously, in the entertainment industry. So even on TV, switch TV on, it looks like we've got a pretty white Australia, but when you go out into the street, the cult community is, I don't know, I would say it's slowly outgrowing the number of white Australians, I would say, but that's not reflected in, TV, employment, justice, education, and all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of, I guess, the views that I have on how just inclusive the solutions, I say, in public sector and how effective they are would come from that. But however, also saying that we are largely still invisible, I will also say that we've also made great strides in the past 20 years that I've been here that I've noticed. But I feel like a lot of that progress that we've made, a lot of the thanks has to go to the non-for-profit sector. I feel like even in my time in the space of, I guess, advocating for the African community and doing a lot of community development work, the first people that would even give us a listening ear was other non-for-profit organizations. We felt that it was just so hard to even access even the different levels of government, to even lobby for ourselves. We didn't know what that looked like, even as migrants, navigating ourselves within this new country. That was something that was quite hard. So yeah, the non-for-profit sector has been a big boost and big help towards the African community. I feel like the non-for-profit sector also really helped us navigate how to most effectively lobby for ourselves and advocate for ourselves, and to actually gain these changes that we've been seeing over time. Even when I first started working, things like even when you go look for jobs, there wasn't this clause that's always there now at the bottom of a job ad. Now, if you look at a lot of job ads down the bottom, you see things like, people of diverse backgrounds encouraged to apply, all that kind of stuff. That wasn't there before. Even leave is either you're taking, personal leave or sick leave and all that kind of stuff. But now you can go to a boss and be like, for religious reasons or cultural reasons, I need to take time off. And it's something that's quite widely accepted that, being people from a colored background, we do have certain needs that don't match what's already out there in the mainstream community. But also a lot of the things that I've noticed that I would also commend the public sector for picking up on is things like even pouring more funding into non-for-profit organizations, because they've realized that a lot of our help, our boost would come from other non-for-profit organizations. So I see funding being put more into these organizations to help us and also to collaborate with them so that we have more of a voice to be able to advocate for ourselves and also to get access to services, whether it's mental health services or other services. And also just supporting people of colored communities to advocate for themselves and tell their stories and to connect to the wider Australian community. Things like even the COVID plan for African Australians, that's some of the things that I felt like were kind of monumental. I think it was the first time where, well, not even the first time, but like one of the first times where I saw something that big actually being put into place and being implemented specifically for the African community. Because like I keep saying, colored communities, but a lot of the things obviously get funneled through all the other communities that have been here longest. And by the time it gets time to the African community, we're literally bottom of the barrel. We're not getting what we would have expected to get. But things like, yeah, the COVID plan for African communities, things that are very monumental. Also, just I feel like now there's a bit of more of understanding that peer support in education and justice and employment and welfare and housing, etc., is very important. Like Paula said, I started a organization called AfroCare, which has been working basically just to provide services, mental health services for African communities. And I was so glad. One of our first projects was to just go in schools and act as welfare officers, I guess, for the African students on campus. That's something that's been quite big because I guess there's a lot of kids, obviously, that, you know, come from overseas, they come to Australia, they have to start school, there's so many cultural barriers, religious barriers, language barriers, and et cetera, that they have to deal with. And, you know, there was such a, like, they just felt so marginalized. This was just this is just something that we felt, and this is a huge need that we noticed, that the kids felt just so marginalized, even in the school setting. And that was distracting away from their mental health, I guess. And also their ability to focus on just their education, which is primarily what they're there for. There'd be a lot of, I guess, social issues that would arise in school that would affect the kids on their mental health. And so, yeah, that's one of the projects that I feel like, within our organization has really, shown just how far we've come. When I was in school back in the day, we didn't have African people on campus or on site at school that we could go talk to, knock on their office door and talk to and say, hey, look, this is what's going on, what do I do? How do I correctly advocate for myself in this situation? You kind of just dealt with it, kept it to yourself, or went home and told your parents, and most of the time, like, nothing would come out of that. And so even for children within schools, I feel like, there's been such a huge change, and that's only one change in one aspect of society, I guess, and there's been many more that I guess other people will be able to touch on within corporate spaces and all of that. I feel like, so I guess in saying that, though, mentioning all of these changes that I've noticed, also I do feel like, us as the African community, I guess I can only speak from that perspective because I have been an advocate in the African community for quite a long time. I feel like we work so hard to lobby for ourselves and to advocate for ourselves. And I don't know whether the feedback that we're getting, though, from government, specifically in the public sector, is reflecting of that. We work very, very hard, dare I say, even more so than some communities that have been here longer than us within the COLD community. I feel like we also carry a lot of the weight of advocating for COLD communities. But then when things are dished out to us, they're dished out to us as, oh, here, this is the solution we've carved out for COLD communities, whereas the African community, I feel like, has carried a lot of the weight of doing the work. So I feel like there's a big discrepancy, and perhaps it's something that we might need to look into, just actually differentiating what is actually for the African community specifically, and so we get what we actually deserve. Also, another thing that we need to look into, I guess, as a community, and also to put forward to, I guess, whether it's local or federal government, is putting money into data and research within mental health, the mental health sector. There's like, it's one of the things that we struggled with for a long time in terms of actually finding data and all of that, whether it's quantitative or qualitative data to support any work that we do. There was virtually none. There was no evidence whatsoever of the need of mental health support within the African community here in Australia. And that's one of the things that makes it really, really hard also for for mental health organizations to actually put anything forward. And that's just been my experience. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tash, for that. I think helping children and helping youth in well-being and during school, and actually having that part of the education system could help not really shame and bring down mental health for young women and young men, but also just provide a solution. And I would just, before I carry on, this webinar is about mental health solutions, inclusive mental health solutions. And this is about what in every industry that the panelists have, what solution can they give, or what solutions have they given to really acknowledge mental health for Afro-Australians. Just to continue that before we move on. And if there's anything that you would like to ask the panelists, please put it in the Q&A. If there's anything that you don't understand, the panelists are gladly will be able to reply after everyone speaks on the Q&A session. Thank you so much. So next we have Veronica. Veronica is one of our Mental Health Foundation Australia ambassadors. Veronica relocated to Australia from the UK 2.5 years ago. She has a very personal connection with mental health and understands the importance of raising awareness and fundraising, especially after battling it herself. She has worked with multiple charities in the UK, South Africa, and Australia. For example, Hero Holidays, Macmillan Cancer Trust, and Teenage Cancer Trust. She has a professional experience in journalism, social media, and TV presenting, and has worked with crowd mix, data transmission, and ITTV. She has a 2-in-1 degree in performing arts from Southampton University, as well as a musical theatre diploma from Birmingham University. She believes in the power of music and arts and can really help with people. And she thinks that it can really help with people with struggling with anxiety and depression. Hi, Veronica.
It's lovely to meet all of these amazing, powerful, strong women. So I feel very blessed to be able to speak to everyone. So this is my experience of when I was in Soweto teaching for Hero Holidays. And basically it was just more, they sort of taught me. And I have such a strong connection to AfroCare. My father was working there for 5 years, and I just hugely just believe that it is the most beautiful place in the world.
Just making sandwiches, me and Cecily. So it's 7:30. We're just on our way to school. This is Cecily. Hello. We're teaching together. We've got 48 5-year-olds and we're super excited to see them. sessions for the second half of our day. So we're off to go and see some crazy talented kids, do some singing, dancing, acting, rapping, so super excited. Let's go and check them out.
I just want to sort of briefly explain my connection to Africa. So my father moved out there. He's a successful lawyer, and he was going to retire, and he said, I want to go out to Africa, and I feel like I've got a connection to this place. And he went out there and was a sort of mentor for a lot of lawyers in Johannesburg, and he worked with them, and just really thought, like, because my thing is, I don't want it to be like, oh, we're doing this out of sympathy, like this kind of thing. It was like he just wanted to give love, and like his heart, like my father has the biggest heart in the world. And I thought I'd go out there and I could do some dance teaching, when really they taught me how to dance. And like, these kids, just the most incredibly talented kids. And they taught me, I've been in really bad places myself. Like I've had situations where I've, tried to take my life. And I found, through the power of music and dance, and specifically in Africa, that the joy is just comes out of everyone, and it's just the love and soul, and I just surrounded by happiness. And I go back to London and everyone's just in a bad mood, and I'm just thinking, like, why can't everyone just be like Africa? And it's just the most beautiful experience. And I love those kids, and I love all the friends I made. We went out one night to a bar that was half a butcher's shop and the other half was like a disco, and we all were just dancing together. and it was just the most eye-opening, beautiful experience. And it was the best experience of my life, and I'm so grateful. And I just want other people to experience what I've experienced. And I get so upset and angry when it comes to, you know, anything to do with racism. And I think with mental health, like, you know, my grandparents, my Polish, and they were in concentration camps in the Second World War. And so it was, you know, I grew up with, like, you know, I was sort of the odd one out, and I know it's not anything like what others have experienced, but it's just everyone gets sad and everyone needs a hug and everyone needs people to be there. And it's so important and so fantastic of what the Mental Health Foundation does, because like all of you are amazing people and you all do so much for communities, and I just feel very blessed to be a part of the Mental Health Foundation of Australia.
Thank you so much, Veronica. We're blessed to have you part of our team as well. And thank you for reflecting on your journey in South Africa. And for Bryce, even though it's part of the Q&A, but since we're at it, for Bryce, she was in Soweto. She spent most of her time in Soweto in South Africa, really just, and it's part of well-being. It's part of rediscovering yourself. And it's really good that you rediscovered yourself out of your comfort zone, and because you're not African, and just really exploring that and really acknowledging that. And as just on your comment on, you wish that if everywhere could be like Africa, Africa has its own share of poverty, homelessness, you know, from our extensive history. But I think, and also mental health is not a word we use in that. So being able to be in a place in South Africa, in Soweto, and just, you know, conquer that, that's really good. Thank you, Veronica, for that. Next, we have Laura Hulley. Laura Hulley is a former colleague of mine. We were both in the Durban Youth Council. She was the mayor of the council and I was the councillor. Laura Hulley is an economic and law student in Melbourne, in NAM, working as a data and systems analysis for a construction company, and she has extensive work in the nonprofit sector. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your introduction. For mental health, specifically in the construction industry, and in my experience in South Africa and as an African in Australia. As Peter mentioned, I work in systems and data analysis at a construction company, and we have the luxury, because it's a highly regulated industry, of having readily available data. And the that I reckon has been red flagged for the mental health issues that many of the construction workers face. Construction workers are 6 times more likely to die from suicide than they are to die from workplace accidents. This is just a statistic to highlight just how dire the issue really is. At my place of employment, mental health is prioritized and heavily funded and supported. However, this is not necessarily the industry norm as it should be. I have provided several solutions here today that I will discuss with the panel. They are very implementable and very realistic, because practical is better, in my opinion. Easily implementable is what you want. Greater efforts should be made by employers to prioritize mental health from site level all the way to head office. Very often there are recommendations given by the Australian government which really encourage employees to highlight mental health, and very often it is just done at head office. which is not usually the majority of the workers of the company. Specifically where I work, there's under 100 people in head office, and workers subcontract out to thousands and thousands of people. So the mental health effect that the company or many company has is thousands and thousands of people, but the regulation or the recommendation by government is that it is needed, and many people just tick that box with head office. And that, of course, is something that needs to be addressed, because they are responsible for many more people. This mental health support should also include entire days that are dedicated to training. At my previous workplaces and from kind of experience shared with other colleagues, we've noted and have highlighted that if there is a project due or work due and a mental health training course scheduled in, the priority is usually the work due or the tender that needs attending to. And so by encouraging entire work days to specific industry-specific mental health issues, I think that this can be avoided, and also creating incentives for employees to attend, like for a Saturday every quarter, where mental health issues that are industry-specific are discussed, and these hours can be paid for. I'm very aware that resources are not always free-flowing and readily available. Incentives of other kinds can be created. By providing an incentive, it'll show employees that employers do prioritize their mental health, and that's something that should be taken seriously. And if they haven't personally, then they maybe will think about it if they are offered an incentive to come in on a Saturday to discuss mental health issues. As we know, the construction industry is largely male dominated. There are more, as we also all know, that there are more males who die from things like suicide. And I think that anonymous support is something that should be really prioritized and encouraged. Mental health often, unfortunately, is heavily stigmatized. So providing services that are anonymous are something that can alleviate whatever stigma that shouldn't exist, but unfortunately does. Workers should also be regularly made aware of support services available to them. There are numerous construction-specific and I'm sure many industry-specific free helplines that people can call upon. It is not enough to post a poster once a year on site or in the office. I think specifically construction, often work is largely subcontracted out. The same guys that are on site, men and women, who are on site last month may not be on site next week. So regularly making employees aware of the services that are available is important, and should be done it should be on the checklist for the site diary. It's something that should be really prioritized, and it's something simple and easy to implement. That is my portion from my work, but personally, I am a South African girl from Durban. And the second speaker, or the third speaker, I think Natasha mentioned that she works at an organization called AfroCare, providing support to school goers. I know that in South Africa, personally, when I was at school, I left when I was 18, South African, I was 18. The priority was not so much on mental health, but on safety and awareness, drug use. We had how the priorities when we had a talk at school, when time was allocated, it wasn't necessarily on mental health illnesses. And then coming to Australia at 18, I noticed that this is something that people talk about. It wasn't a thing that I necessarily discussed in my capacity at school or in my working life in South Africa. So I acknowledged that this is a conversation that people were having, and I was surprised, and I was heavily encouraged to engage in this conversation personally. And that's something that I think is a notable mention, that there's conversation here. But what I think, coming from an African background, I find that in the working environment, there are too many check boxes. You know, if there's a diversity and inclusion program, then they're doing their part, which is simply not enough. I have to acknowledge that these are things that big corporates may have ignored, and post the Black Lives Matter movement and post several movements that have happened, people are more inclined to have these programs, but having these programs is simply not enough. Teaching someone how to communicate with somebody and what their cultural backgrounds, cultural needs may be, is not enough. It needs to be, the aftercare, I think, is heavily neglected. I think that having the diversity and inclusion program is great. Big corporates are aware that there is a need for them, but the aftercare is something that I think is heavily neglected. It should be written into policy once training has been given. There really is no place for people to slip up reoccurringly, and I think this should be written into policy, and people should be made aware that their actions have implications. But I definitely applaud companies for moving in this direction, but I think that there should be better aftercare. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that. Those solutions, I think, could even better not just private companies, but also public companies, because like the government hires most of citizens in Australia, and everything just starts at home. If the government is not implementing this, not doing policies to do this, then private companies can't follow. But yes, the construction industry is shunned upon, and we also have symposiums and mental health talks on minors. Well, yesterday we had a minors and mental health webinar, and we have a construction symposium coming up, and this would be really good to do. So yes, we have our final speaker, Mashehi. Thank you so much, Laura. Our final speaker, so Mashehi Komba, is an arts practitioner and a community service practitioner. Mashehi's experience is in implementation and oversight of government-funded projects across local and regional Victoria. Mashehi utilizes evidence-based practice and project management institute methodologies to create opportunity and sustainability. Proficient in managing teams, monitoring project and scheduling, Mashehi prides herself in being responsive to innovation as part of the practice that seeks to ensure long-term success in portfolio management and program delivery, whilst creating social justice throughout social procurement. Hi, Mashehi.
Hi, thanks for having me. I feel very privileged to be in this space and talk to a lot of, and also see a lot of African people in this space having this discussion. I haven't been to a space like this before, but I know from experience it is a topic that's always arising in my friends group and in other workplaces when I find, that one Black person at work that I work with. But yeah, I'd just like to just touch on my experience. I'm an arts practitioner, but I've also used my art to educate, inform, and create other opportunities for young people, and also use it as an engagement strategy in community and for youth to, open up discussions of mental health. And throughout my time, I've worked as, medical admin, a youth worker, case management. I've also worked in a senior role, helping to foresee a youth service tender and implement that but I've also worked as a project manager in local government and focused more on capacity building and community development and how we can create more social procurement opportunities for people in the projects that are funded by council and also funded stuff. And I guess that's where my social justice element comes from, because I think that there's opportunity in everything. It's just the way that people are looking at their resources. I find that things have always been operating very segregated, and that starts at a structural level, even, for example, having two different departments that don't share resources. you know, and that transcends into everything else. So if the government operates like that, how does it operate on a community level when they think about helping and supporting people and addressing things like low socioeconomic issues? So where I've utilised my art, I've been part of safe space for people to create positive social well-being, and also being part of one of Australia's largest health organisations previously, which also focused on holistic well-being, which I think sometimes isn't talked about. You know, what well-being is social. It can be physical. It can be, you know, it is mental, and it also is like financial as well. It has all those aspects are interrelated and they're not separate, as well as intergenerational trauma, and, you know, having the right health services and right trained people to address those kinds of things. And in my time as a youth worker, the commonalities of, you know, common denominator issues that I would always come across was, you know, the fact of low socioeconomic issues were not being addressed. And that was things like, if a family household has financial issues, I guess, yeah, as a youth worker, I noticed that, you know, young people always come for one or two things. Either there'll be mental health issues, or, you know, race-based stuff or educational stuff, but also low socioeconomic issues. And the reason why the youth service existed was that we provided programs that, you know, young people couldn't afford. So if we're not addressing the low socioeconomic issues and supporting their families or households to find sustainable financial means, we're not also supporting the young person either. And so that's hence why I focus more on project management and finding opportunities to support, get involved in more entrepreneurship and in entrepreneurship opportunities, and participating in things such as supporting a lot of the mothers that live in the housing estate and to develop their own businesses so they're able to address their financial issues at home, and also create intergenerational change in their household and their young people being able to see that. And so I've always been looking at the gap areas and finding out how can I create opportunity, or how can I include people. And just to touch on back on some of the structural stuff in my work, when I talked about creating evidence-based work, I think that this is an important solution that we can all contribute to. If we don't have the data that supports or creates evidence to create change, we're also not supporting our own community to inform, like, other people, other decision makers and government, that there is a pattern of behaviour, or there's systematic things that are happening, as well as validating people's experience as much as some of the stories that we've heard today. You know, how to capture that anecdotal information to inform people and decision makers. And I think that creating these kinds of things will help create guidelines, or at least try and make things like an acceptable baseline of, you know, services. Back to the program that we created running at schools, we managed to go to 265 schools, and we also got an award for the Human Rights Award for addressing racism. And the only reason why we were able to achieve that is because a group of arts practitioners decided to step away from the organisation and focus on our creative program to address issues within our community. And and apart from creating these programs that we knew were supportive, we also had to make sure that we were able to capture anecdotal information, create evidence-based work to inform these spaces. That meant informing schools, informing the justice system and detention centers. I want to highlight, I think it's very important to create evidence-based work. And I think that all the African practitioners in their spaces, can somehow get together to start documenting this information so that it can be provided to government organisations as well as these already existing health organisations that feel that they are doing a good job, when we know very well that the data that they collect is not useful and it sometimes vilifies people from our community and deters people from coming to get further help. Pass on the mic back to Phyllis Sunday. And sorry for the technical difficulties. I'd love to elaborate a bit further. I don't think it's going to improve, but thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Mashehi, for contributing to society, and well done for getting the Human Rights Award in your industry. I would like to introduce Taita Chigora before we go into our Q&A. Taita is also one of our multicultural ambassadors here at the Mental Health Foundation. Taita currently works as a therapeutic youth worker for young people who come predominantly from a background of long-term neglect and abuse. As an advocate for empowering the African community, she exercises this passion through her role as the Africa Day Australia Youth Forum's coordinator. In line with her family-centered values, this year she is the Domestic Violence Victoria Board Observer, one for Building Bridges of Hope and Care. Taita has gone on to establish Chosen Foundation, a not-for-profit organization that supports disadvantaged and vulnerable communities in Zimbabwe. Caring and resourceful, she dedicates herself to promoting the well-being of the African community. Great to have you with us today, Taita.
Thank you, Pila, and thank you so much for having me tonight. I just want to first say Happy Africa Day to everyone before we proceed, and just a huge thank you to everyone who has spoken tonight, who has shared their personal and professional experiences and knowledge. It has been really amazing hearing everyone. I think because obviously we're running out of time, I will probably just speak a little bit more to potential solutions to increase access to mental health in Afro communities throughout Australia. I mean, I do have a pretty long story about my own personal mental health journey, but I think it definitely is important to probably speak a lot more to what are some practical steps that a lot of us can take, even following this meeting, around how we can advocate for mental health support and awareness in Afro-Australian, communities. And one thing that has really, been ringing in my mind for some time now is I think a lot of us as Africans, we need to first acknowledge that we come into a lot of the spaces that we occupy with a different set of challenges and needs. And because of that, it is important that we communicate these needs, whether it is to our employers, to our peers, to our friends. And a lot of us are very good at being Facebook and Twitter celebrities and advocates, but I think it's really important for us to start having a lot of these conversations in the spaces that we predominantly occupy. So for example, I know that for myself personally, last year with the Black Lives Matter riots and everything that was happening in America and even here in Australia, it really did affect me quite severely. And it did also impact my ability to, to bring my full self to the table when it came to any of my projects or even just involvement at work. And it really came to a place where I had to be very honest with myself and my peers around what sort of support that I needed. But I think from that, it also then encouraged me to not only speak within my social circles, but to start searching online for what sort of initiatives and government support were available that were looking for more African voices to come to the table. Now, I know a lot of times we do feel quite excluded, but I think it's also important for us to also be aware of the fact that we do have a part to play and our voices are actually valued in certain spaces. So it's important for us to maximize on those opportunities. For example, over the weekend, I was with the Lord Mayor Sally Cap, and I quickly touched base with her around a project that I had pitched to her some time back, and she had mentioned that they were going to release the annual budget and the City of Melbourne plan today. And even from today, reviewing that, I then realized that there's a lot of funding that is available to a lot of I guess, diverse and multicultural communities. And these are the opportunities that we need to take advantage of. I think it's important for us to have these conversations where we do share our experiences, we do share various insights and professional knowledge, but what happens after these conversations? I think it's important that as a follow-up from these conversations, we do also hold a lot of these social services, I guess, industries and companies accountable. And we do say, hey, we do want to participate, we do want to place as well in some of your policy making and some of the conversations that you are having that do affect us as a community. And I think it's also very important to also to mention that the way that us, I guess, Afro-Australians and our communities interact is completely different. I don't communicate with my mother about mental health the same way that I can talk to it about with my brother. So the language is different. And it's important that we communicate this to a lot of the social services that we are looking to cater to us, right? So I think it's really important for us to start having these conversations around what are some practical steps that we are taking outside of our spaces, right? When it comes to the external services that we are seeking. Because I think, as Natasha mentioned, there is a lot of work that we're already doing within our communities. We are doing everything that we can. And I think a really big challenge of a lot of Afro-Australians is that we do collectively carry a lot of our shared experiences and shared challenges. And sometimes that can be a really, really hard cross to bear. So I think it's important that we sometimes look for other places that we can also be advocated for, and we can ask for help and assistance. And I do think that one place to really do that is to research on some of the grants that are available. There are so many research grants that universities like University of Melbourne and Swinburne University do provide to multicultural communities to look into things that we are discussing today. And every single time, maybe for example, when I see something like this, I send it to my peers who I know are interested in research or who might know someone else. So I think it's important for us to start creating these networks where we can start sharing this information with people. And I think this is something that definitely Mental Health Foundation is really working on already, to create these networks and these safe spaces for us to start having these discussions around how can we not only support each other internally, but start to hold, I guess, a lot of the social services and government support that we want accountable, and how can we help them help us? Because the truth is that there's nothing for us without us. So we need to start finding ways that we can also be given a seat at those tables so that they can better cater to people like us.
Thank you so much, Taita. Thank you for highlighting the importance of really representation in the places at work, and also providing a solution. As you said, like we are because of everyone else. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you so much to our attendees for attending this, both on Zoom and on Facebook. And thank you so much to our panelists. I think we all walk away with something to do. You know, we can always improve our footprint in society. I think we've left inspired, and I hope the right people have seen this, people in the right spaces, you know, because I've realized from working in different industries, from nonprofits to public and private sector, is that as a person of color, we also do need to take advantage of the other people that are not of color, to really push them and educate them and tell them what to do. So thank you so much for attending today. I am closing our discussion.